You beat that to
So, unlike most of the other presenters, this is my first time presenting this at all. And this is the culmination of, it's essentially a recap of a 60-page dissertation. So, it's going to be a little heavier. And I thought that since, in all the discussions we have, we often talk about how strong towns are resilient towns, resilient communities, all this, that, and whatever. And Chuck has been mentioning a lot recently complex adaptive systems, that this would be particularly important. So, here we go. Complex adaptive systems are natural systems. The natural world is a giant complex adaptive system and also infinite complex adaptive systems. So it's complex in that there are too many things to be able to keep track of at any given time, and they're constantly changing. So even if you took a picture of it, it would be different instantly. And it's adaptive because there are feedback loops. If something happens, then that affects other things that change the original parameters that allowed the first thing to happen. So that is the definition of pretty much every natural system. Any other definition is more or less applying to an engineered system. That's a closed, few variables. Even if it's a lot of variables, it's not this. So the big thing that complex adaptive systems do is they exhibit emergence. And the emergent properties of a complex adaptive system are what often define the system. So, for example, termite mounds. Termite mounds are the emergent property of termite colonies. Snowflakes are the emergent property of atmospheric deposition. And cities are the emergent properties of humans making a living. So, moving from that, we get on to resilience theory. And this is the meat of what my dissertation is on. There's not a lot of actual applying resilience theory to other sorts of complex adaptive systems, but it's well defined in ecology. So the big thing with resilience theory is it ignores the idea of equilibrium or other predicted optimizations. So you can't say that resilience is not the ability of a community or an economy to bounce back, right back to where it was. That comes from physics. It's sort of an engineered definition of how a material is resilient, but that is not a complex adaptive system. Instead, resilience theory focuses on the boundaries between different basins of attraction in the stability landscapes. So what this means is this incredibly strange and interesting diagram here. So say that this is a productive urban neighborhood, and that is a decaying urban neighborhood. The thing that you need to focus on for resilience theory is the defining point in between. And the stability landscape, that topography there, is dynamic. In fact, you'll see that this dot is in the exact same spot on both charts, but it's in a different basin in each one because the landscape has moved. Think white flight. The perception of the neighborhood has instantly changed. The ground on which the entire community was built has shifted. Something has changed. Everything slides in one direction or the other because the money decides that it either doesn't want to be there or it doesn't want to be there. An example, Detroit. You can pretty clearly see where there was enough money to maintain some level of built environment and where there wasn't any after that. The idea here is the definition between the basins of attraction was pretty narrow. Not many people would go even a few blocks outside of where they worked anymore. And with that, all the places nearby that they weren't, driving long distance to just became not valued anymore. So, all complex adaptive systems exhibit this adaptive cycle, which is interesting. So the characteristics of this are that starting here, this is a basic system forming, and it's exhibiting entrepreneurial exploitation, which drives the system up to the K box, where that's organizational consolidation. So in the first two terms, you can pretty much look at a well-developed economy and understand, hey, there's this opportunity to try to make steel in the mountains of Pennsylvania. And then it becomes a massive industry, and over time it becomes a single employer in Pittsburgh. And that's a highly developed, highly interconnected in that area system. Then the creative destruction. It's no longer feasible. Japanese steel is replacing it. And finally, it cycles back up to the re or destructuring. So as you can see, this tails off in two different directions. It can either go back to what it was and try to go in that direction, or it can filter down, and basically that level of complex adaptive system just vanishes. And now the axes that this is on are showing, we go through the connectedness of the cycle. It passes through different levels of potential. So when you're reorganizing, there's a really high level of potential. Now, when you're at the very top in the K box, there's an extremely high level of potential, but as you'll notice, there's also a very big distance to go down from potential when there is release. And the speed at which this cycle happens is very slow through the R and K process. It stays there. That's called the forward loop. It's a long, deliberate process, and extremely fast through the back loop, the destructive loop. Now, there's another axis here. Now, this gets a little funky. You don't need to stare at that too much. But essentially, it's saying that the resilience, the way it's shaped, it more or less says that resilience of the system is directly opposite the connectedness. So more or less, that's a highly interconnected system. It's more likely to fail massively. And panarchy. Panarchy is the explanation that there are infinite sizes and scales of different complex adaptive systems, and the key thing is that the different scales affect each other. The small scales can cause revolt, and the large scales can cause smaller ones to remember. So, revolt is the butterfly causing a hurricane, or Rosa Parks sitting on a bus and starting movement. The remembering is the jungle swallowing Angkor Wat, or Brooklyn Heights becoming one of the most valuable neighborhoods in New York City again, because the core of New York's economy never vanished. So the takeaways are that systems with low degrees of panarchy, the bigger the distance between the different sizes and scales without anything in between them, the more likely they're not going to interact with each other. Change won't happen one way or another quickly. When it does, it's massive and catastrophic. And a highly developed interconnected system isn't a good thing. It's actually unhealthy and dangerous in many ways. So what we need to do is to try to create cities that are resilient, allow constant small-scale changes as much as physically possible, and foster the independent functioning of regions, neighborhoods, streets, and individual blocks on both the economic and social grounds. So, thank you.